Hi. How are all you feeling this morning? Yeah, that's good. Okay, I hope you are all energetic and awake this morning. I know I am. I got to play drums this morning. It's so much more of a workout than playing bass. So I am pumped up right now and excited, and I am ready to dive in. Are you guys ready to dive in? So let's do it then. Okay, we're going to continue our way through the first book of Corinthians, the book of 1 Corinthians, and we are going to be in chapter 10, verses 1 through 13. And as you guys are turning to that section in your Bibles, by the way, if you need a Bible, there's a whole bunch back there. Just raise your hand and some happy smiling person will bring you one. Okay, but as you are turning to that section in your Bibles, I have a question that I have to ask you guys. Okay, and that question is this: don't you just hate it when you make the same mistake over and over and over again? Don't you just hate that? Isn't that just like amazingly frustrating? Let's go one step further, okay? Isn't it even more frustrating when you actually look at the situation and you realize that you are making the same mistake that people before you have made over and over and over again? Makes you want to scream, right? And man, could I tell you a story about that kind of frustration, but I don't want to keep us here all day. Okay? So I'm going to spare you because we have a bunch of stuff that we have to cover. So if you want to know the story, okay, later on, if you would like to join me, Bill S. Preston Esquire, and Ted Theodore Logan, and go down memory lane to my titration lab for organic chemistry back when I was at the University of Delaware, you can ask me about that after the service, okay? Does anyone understand the reference I just made? Okay. Those of you that don't, you need to educate yourself on the amazingness that is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's one of the greatest movies ever made. I'm just saying, but I digress, okay? Frustration, right? Repeating others' mistakes. That is where we are in the book of 1 Corinthians here. New chapter, same point. By the way, the first time I preached, I told you that Paul was going to go off for 3 chapters on a certain subject. We're in the middle of it right now. Okay? So let's see how Paul continues to make this point here. He says in verse 1, "For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea." Okay? So like I said, Paul is still discussing the same subject he has been since chapter 8, and he continues to give the Corinthians examples to try and help them understand the point. By the way, if someone continues and dwells on a certain point when they're teaching you, it means they really want you to get the point. It means it's probably important, so you should pay attention. Okay, so Paul's next approach to help the Corinthians understand is to draw a comparison. And the comparison is between the Corinthians and their ancestors in faith, the Jews. The Jews were God's chosen people. He moved in miraculous and wonderful ways on their behalf, and never more impressively than in 2 specific instances. First, they were led out of Egypt by God in the form of a pillar of cloud. It led them to the Red Sea, where God moved again, as only he can, parted the waters so they could cross the Red Sea on dry ground. Then, after they crossed, the cloud continued to lead them until they entered the Promised Land some 40 years later. So, through the leadership of Moses, the Jews were brought into a special relationship with God. They were delivered through the waters of the Red Sea, and God's presence was ever with them until they reached the Promised Land. In the same way, the Corinthians, and us with them, have been brought into a special relationship with God through our Savior, Jesus Christ, right? We have been led to the water by the prodding of the Holy Spirit, been brought through those waters, the waters of baptism, away from the oppression of sin and death, and have emerged on the other side with that same Holy Spirit that led us to the water, leading us through the wilderness of this life until we finally reach our promised land, paradise in heaven with God. This is good stuff that Paul is pointing out. He continues at verse 3. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Okay, so more comparison here. Just like we Christians share one meal in communion or the Lord's table or the Eucharist, whatever you want to call it, the Jews also shared one food and one drink when God moved on their behalf to provide for their needs in the wilderness. They shared one food, the manna, that appeared every morning, and they shared one drink in the water that flowed from the rock when they were thirsty. Just as the bread and cup represent Jesus' sacrifice to save us, the manna and the rock show God moving to provide for the Israelites. It's a picture of Christ, foreshadowing his coming so many years before he did. And I just want to stop right here. And I want to point out how amazingly cool this is. I don't know if your brains function the way mine does, but I love when God does this. When he shows us in sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways that this whole thing, the whole book, all of history was planned out from the beginning by him. For all you gamers in the room, I will use some gamer terminology, okay? I love when God throws in some Easter eggs. He throws in some Easter eggs and shows us that all of history from the beginning to end is part of his love story for us and to show us how amazing and worthy of all the glory he is. It is so cool. He is best storyteller ever. But let's keep going, because Paul has now set up his point, and now he's going to make it. Or going to begin to make it. He says in verse 5, "Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness." Okay, so here we go. Paul is starting to make his point. So even though the Jews had this amazing relationship with God, even though they saw these amazing and miraculous things that he was doing on their behalf, they didn't get it. Rather than being humbled and sobered by the fact that the God of the universe would stoop so low as to help them, they instead became arrogant and puffed up because he did. They became puffed up because God liked them better than everybody else, clearly. So they thought they could do whatever they wanted because God liked them more. And this led to their downfall. In their arrogance, they rejected God's plan to enter the promised land, and so God punished them to die in the desert. You think that would have woken them up, right? Well, hold on to that for a second, because Paul continues at verse 6. "Now, these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did." Okay, here we are. The point. So Paul says, even though this seems like a horrible thing, and it is, Paul says, hold on, wait a second. There is a silver lining. See, we can't go back in time with Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted Theodore Logan and change what the Israelites did, but we can learn from their bad example. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, the least you can do is serve as a bad example for everybody else, right? That's kind of what Paul's saying here. Okay, understand, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Okay, so we don't want to condemn the Jews, because remember, we're not supposed to get puffed up in our knowledge either. But, at the very least, we can look at the example they set for us and learn from it. Even though we have a special relationship with God through Jesus, like the Jews did through Moses, we must learn from them and realize, get this, we aren't anything special. A wise man once said, "You are not a unique and special snowflake." Name that reference. We are nothing more than sinners saved by grace. And it is only by that grace that God bestows on us that we can amount to anything through him. We can't become puffed up and overconfident in ourselves like the Jews did. So, since Paul wants the Corinthians to avoid that, he, in his wisdom, decided to provide some examples. So let's look at some examples. Oh, bad examples. He says at verse 7, "Don't be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test Christ, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes, and do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel." So Paul says, learn from their example. And just in case you need a little helping hand, let me give you some specifics. And then he rattles down a list of several sins. By the way, this is just some of them, not all of them, that the Israelites committed while they wandered in the desert. By the way, remember I said you thought it would have woken them up? Clearly it didn't. Okay? So he rattles down this list, and this list is not picked by accident. It speaks very loudly to the Corinthians who are living in Corinth, right? It speaks very loudly to the situation that the Corinthians find themselves in Corinth. First, he directs them to idol worship and the instance of the golden calf that Aaron and the Israelites constructed as Moses was up on the mountain getting the law from God. And now remember, Corinth, right? Corinth is a pagan town. Temples everywhere, to every god imaginable. The Corinthians are surrounded by idols and idol worshipers. In fact, many of them were idol worshipers before they came to Christ. So Paul says, Corinthians, don't do that. Remember, there is only one God. Do not betray him and go and worship idols. Learn from the past. Next, he points out the sin of the Israelites in joining Moabite women in sexual immorality and sacrifice to their gods. Okay, this one not only involved idol worship, but also sexual sin as well. And for this sin, God struck them with a plague, and in one day, 23,000 Israelites died from that plague. Again, remember, Corinth, famous for having a single temple with 1,000 prostitutes in its employment, all on its own. They are in the middle of it. Paul says, stay away from that too. Learn from the past. And then the final two examples, bad examples, he gives for them to look at are instances when the people of Israel raised up a complaint against Moses. Now remember, Moses is God's representative among the people. Okay, so a complaint against Moses is a complaint against, the boss, God. And God took it as just that. And the punishment for that sin was death, either by poisonous snakes, in the first example he talks about, or by other means, like the earth literally swallowing them up, or them being condemned to die in the desert and never enter the promised land. Now remember, Paul has already told us that some of the Corinthians are complaining about him. So he says to them, don't do that. Okay? Realize who you're actually complaining against. You're not complaining against me. You're complaining against God. Don't do that. Learn from the past. He says, stay away from this stuff. Don't get puffed up in your special place with God, but learn from the bad examples the Israelites have set. Just as he was telling them to not be arrogant like the Gnostics were, he is also saying, look at the Israelites. Don't be arrogant like they were either, and learn from their example. He continues at verse 11. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Paul does something interesting here. He restates his point that the very reason the Israelites did these things and that they're recorded for us is so we can look to it and not make the same mistake they did. But then he builds upon it. And he does that by bringing back the point he's been making this entire time about not being puffed up. He says, if you think you're standing firm, watch out, because that's the time you are even more likely to fall. Okay, I like watching European soccer. Chelsea is my favorite football club. Okay? And there's a saying in soccer, and the saying is this: the most likely time your team is going to concede a goal is right after they scored one. It's a warning to never let your guard down and make the mistake of becoming too secure in your own position. Another saying I like is this: don't lose your footing in the beauty of the view from the mountaintop. For it's not nearly as beautiful if you fall down the mountain. Don't let your guard down. Don't get puffed up and arrogant. Stay humble and learn from the examples of your father in faith, the Jews, Corinthians. Those who don't learn from the past are what? Doomed to repeat it, right. Don't let yourself become one of those people who repeat it. And he continues, and he points out that the very same temptations that the Corinthians are facing are ones everyone has faced throughout all of time. They are nothing new. This is both good and bad news. It means that throughout the history of mankind, there have been others that have faced that same temptation you're facing and have resisted giving into it. But on the other side of the same coin, it also means that there are those that have faced that same temptation and failed. But see, the Corinthians have an ace in the hole. First, they have Paul pointing this out to them. But more importantly, God is in their corner and is ever faithful. He will not allow them to be tempted beyond what they can bear, and will also provide a way out for them. If they'll humble themselves and trust in God and not in themselves, he will provide a way for them to endure. Now, they still have to make the choice. They still have to choose to follow God's way out. But if they do, they will persevere in the face of temptation. Dear Lord, that is good news. I don't know about you, but that makes me excited. That gets me pumped up. But it also makes me a little scared. See, it's awesome to know that God is there with me. But it's also a little scary to know that the choice is left up to dum-dum me with my dum-dum ways. Okay? I mean, I'll be honest with you, I try to put on a good show, but I am stupid sometimes. I'm sure none of you can relate to that, right? But let's do that, okay? Let's relate. Okay? Let's take this letter that was written to the Corinthians so many years ago and apply it to us. God placed it before us here for a reason. So let's look at it. Let's talk about idol worship. Are there things in your life that you place above God? Money, popularity, social media clout, your family, yourself? Any one of these things can take the place of God. And the thing is, sometimes we don't make such an outward expression of it as the Israelites did by building a golden calf. Now, sometimes it's something as subtle as not going to church when you have family visiting, or what you post on social media, or how you spend your money on, or the attitude that you embrace when you're in worship. Do I make Sunday mornings all about me and my preferences? Or do I make it about focusing on God and giving Him all the glory no matter what situation I find myself in? How about this one? Do you refuse to believe that God can work in wonderful and miraculous ways in your life, just as He did for the Israelites? I'll phrase it a different way. Have you given up hope? Hear me. That is placing yourself above God. So do you worship idols? Well, listen, learn from the example of the Israelites. Don't follow their bad example. Learn from the past. Next subject. Let's talk about sexual immorality. Time for everybody to avoid contact with the pastor. I'm talking to the men in the room particularly, but ladies, don't think that means you're off the hook. Okay? Remember, Jesus said that even looking at a woman with lust in your heart is the same as committing sexual immorality. So guys, what you looking at on the internet? On TV? In your everyday life? You know what I'm talking about. Your eyes are the window to your soul. What you place before them can purify it or pollute it with toxic waste. So what you looking at, guys? And ladies, like I said, you're not off the hook. You guys tend to be less visual than us guys, but are you guarding your heart? Or are you allowing it to run away with itself? Putting all kinds of inappropriate thoughts in your head about men other than your husband? Are your emotions getting the better of you? Well, don't let your guard down. Don't follow bad examples. All of us learn from the past. And finally, how about grumbling and complaining? This is a big one, but it can really be summed up in one question. Do you trust God? Answer me this. Hasn't He proven Himself powerful and faithful for all of history? Okay, then. Why do you resist Him? Why do you fight against Him? Why do you get frustrated by God and complain about Him because things aren't working out the way you think they should? Hey, listen to me. Remember what I said before. God is the best storyteller ever. That means that His plan for the story of your life is way, way, way better than any story you could come up with. So stop grumbling and complaining against Him. Trust in Him. Don't continue to make the same mistake over and over and over again. Learn from the past. And honestly, there are too many examples for us to cover here, right? Some of you think that you're trapped in a cycle of behavior because of the family that you belong to. Let that go. Some of you feel trapped in addiction of some sort. Let that go. Some of you are so puffed up and arrogant in how you think you know how God ought to move that you can't see the amazing new thing that he is doing because you don't think he should move that way. Or you let your friends tell you God wouldn't move in that way. Hear me. Let that go. Here's the good news. In fact, it is awesome news. Listen. God has already won the battle. God has already provided a way for us to resist temptation and to stop continuing in our own self-destructive ways. The temptations that we face are nothing new. We have example after example of people both failing to resist them and succeeding. We can persevere. We just have to get out of our own way. Don't be puffed up and arrogant, thinking you know better than God. Instead, trust him. Don't continue to make the same mistakes over and 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 over again. Learn from the past.